Good morning. Now, as I think Mr. McIntosh explained to us yesterday, we have one witness today, Marianne Kane, and she will be giving her evidence remotely, and there will not be a live stream today.
Yeah, that is correct, Lord. The intention is that it is being recorded and it will be available on the website in due course, but it's not being live streamed today. I think also, my Lord, if I just say, apparently she may require assistance if there are any technological glitches. I think my Lord can deal with that.
Now, good morning, Miss Kane. Right. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Right. May just be a question of volume. We'll see if we can tackle this at our end. Could you just say something, Miss Kane, just to check whether we can hear you? Right, we can't hear you.
I think Cherie is trying to assist. So I don't know how long it's going to be.
Right. When you say Cherie, is that?
From West, who's here.
Oh, right. Colleen, is it? Am I seeing the icon for the voice being off?
Yes, I see that too.
No. Can someone do something about that?
She's been asked to unmute.
Oh.
I think. No, so it's from her end. Yes. I think that might be her.
Ah, right. Now. So that's unmuted.
It was working earlier, was it not?
I believe so.
Okay, right.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you very clearly. Excellent.
Sorry
Right.
about that.
It's, you can't, in the end of the day, the technology is, goes its own way. Now, good morning, Ms. Kane. As you appreciate, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. Connell, who you should be able to see in due course. But first of all, I understand you're prepared to take the oath.
Yes.
Can I ask you to raise your right hand, just sitting where you are, and repeat these words after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, we've seen on the screen that you're accompanied by, as I understand it, Miss Yvonne Steele, is that correct?
Yes, she's in another room now.
Right. So you are in a room alone.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Now, your evidence will probably take much of the day. We will break at about 11:30 for coffee. But at any time, if for any reason you want to take a break, just give us an indication and we'll break. I want you to feel that you're in control of the proceedings.
Okay, thanks.
Now, I'll hand over to Mr. Connell.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to try to work through what I'd like to ask you using your witness statement as a guide, and I understand you have a means of seeing things that we want you to see on a screen. Can I just start by asking you a formal question that we ask all the witnesses, which is that you've provided a witness statement, and are you content that that should form part of your evidence that you adopt for this inquiry?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much. Now, just starting at the beginning, as it were, I understand your background, your original background in the health service is one in what used to be called hotel services. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Later it became soft FM, but hotel services at one point. And
Yes.
you held a number of positions in that general line. And then you were appointed in 2014, and we'll come to the detail in a little while, 2014 as Interim Director of Estates and Facilities for GGC, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was a fairly senior position covering the whole of the board, not just a particular hospital, is that correct?
That's correct. It was a board-wide position.
And as I say, we'll come back to that a little bit later, but just so we can set out the framework, essentially you were interim director for about 16 months from 2014, and then an associate director role, and then back into an interim director a little later when Mr. Loudon indicated he was leaving. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can I just ask you about one other post that you held, just so we have it in our minds as we move through the questions? Once you were interim director, were you also a co-chair of the water safety group?
Yes. That's correct. When I took up the position of interim director, I discovered that part of that role was establishing actually a water safety group for the board, and I, in the role of interim director, was expected to chair that group.
Were you the only chair, or was there a co-chair?
No, there wasn't a co-chair.
And did that chairing of the water safety group bring with it any additional responsibilities for water safety?
The chairing of the water safety group brought with it the role of designated person water, I discovered. And the designated person water or a responsible person water is expected to chair the water safety group.
Mr. Connolly, just so that I'm keeping up, Ms. Kane has said that she took over the chair of, or became chair of the Water Safety Group when she became interim director. Now, you've established there was 2 dates on which she became interim director. It may be that
That would be in
I'm missing something.
2014, I think, my lord.
So we're talking about 2014.
Yes, that's correct. That was 2014. That happened in 2014, and I retained that role. That role never reverted back to the director of estates and facilities after I was no longer the interim director.
Right. So you took it on and you kept it with you when you became associate director, and then still had it when you became interim director again.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. If I can just, perhaps easier if we look at page 386. Now I'm going to use page numbers for your witness statement, which you'll find at the top of the page, because that's what suits the electronics here. So you see a number at the top of the page, page 386, you got that?
Yeah, but I can't see it.
Okay, so you've got a page, you just can't see the number.
I can't.
Right.
I can't see the font size or anything on it. I have it now.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just going to ask you about something that you said on page 386. You mentioned technical leads
Yes.
leading board wide. On water, that you say was Mr. Gallagher, is that right, Alan Gallagher?
Yes, that's correct. It was Alan Gallagher. At that time, he was the head of maintenance for Clyde sector, and the structure, the management structure at that time was that each sector maintenance manager took a professional leadership role for one topic. We established that after the implementation of the National Statutory Compliance and Risk Tool system, which was round about 2012. A head of maintenance was designated to take forward, not just for water, but for ventilation and electrical services, etc. The leadership board-wide, their role was to coordinate and ensure that there was a unified approach being taken in the health board to compliance matters in relation to that subject, and to engender professional consensus among the estates maintenance managers in particular on these topics.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about that. If we could bring up page 388, please. And near the foot, you say you started working with Alan Gallagher, and you use the phrase the board's professional lead for water safety. Now,
Yes.
that's not a label, I don't think, that we've heard previously in the inquiry that I can recollect anyway. So you're then asked on page 389, well, what was that, the professional lead of water safety? What did they do? Is that any different from what you've just been describing to us as the technical
No.
lead?
No.
So is it the same as a designated person under the arrangements for water regulation, or is it different? Do you know?
On reflection and with hindsight, that role should fulfil the role of the designated person, but at that time it wasn't identified as such as being the designated person. That person in the water scheme was my post.
Right. Okay.
But the role was effectively the same as designated person. It was to coordinate and ensure that authorising engineer reports, that authorised persons, competent persons and statute and SHTMs were being interpreted and applied across the board. But that's not the designation that was given to that role at that time.
Right. Just so that I'm keeping up, Ms. Kane, as I understand it, in 2014, on taking up the interim director position, you learned that among your responsibilities were to act as designated person under the statutory regulatory system. And one of the responsibilities associated with that was chairing the water safety group. But as designated person, it was for you to appoint competent persons and a responsible person. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Right. Sorry, Mr. Cullen.
No, I think we may find ourselves coming back to that in a little while, Ms. Kane. But I'm obliged for that answer to his lordship. I just wanted to ask you another question about what you said on page 389 when you've been asked by the questioner, well, tell me about your role at the new hospital. But then you quite rightly say, well, my role was a board-wide role, not simply at the new hospital. And then you set out how things were done just beneath that. And what you say there is your day-to-day responsibilities in relation to the new hospital and the other geographic sectors were based on interactions I had with the various managers and matters which were escalated to me. So does that mean that you're sort of waiting for things to be brought to you? You're just reacting?
No, not all of the time. No, there were a number of groups established where we looked at individual topics within, especially the estate's structure, and we talked about various pieces of statute, various compliance issues, how the services were being run. So there was proactive engagement with managers as well as the escalation arrangements that were in place through the head of maintenance and the general management structure up to myself. So it was a kind of combined operational and strategic role.
Thank you. Now, because I'm using your witness statement to help us go through this day, you will find that we jump around a little bit and we'll sometimes hit the same point more than once. So apologies for that. Can we just move on to page 390? Because on page 390, you're being asked about a topic which does recur, which is that some of the issues that arose at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital over staffing and budgets. Now, at the foot of the page 390, you're talking about savings identified as part of the full business case. So that's the full business case for the new hospital, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Savings are going to be identified as £1 million from existing budgets. Inflationary uplifts were not applied to the full business case its costings. And then you say some fundamental tasks had been omitted.
Mhm.
That your understanding.
Yes.
And then you say on page 391, we'll just move to, and if you have any difficulty with the pages or the numbers, please just indicate and we'll deal with that. Page 391, your understanding was that therefore you started out with not enough people on estates in the new hospital. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
And I'll just jump down 391 to the question you then asked, which is the obvious question. Well, what were these things that were omitted from the budgets? Can you just take us through what you're telling us about here? Because I think you mentioned a number of issues that hadn't been budgeted for. Now, the first one is
Okay.
something about management structures.
Yes.
So what's that about?
So the reference there relates to the business case not making provision for dedicated time for, in particular, APs and RPs to fulfil the role. The resourcing was based on the day-to-day operational delivery, but no allowance was built in for additional management to cover fully and give them enough time to undertake their duties for APs and RPs.
So these are the kind of statutory obligations that each level of that structure has. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, that's correct.
Just for the avoidance of any possible doubt, when we're talking about an RP, a responsible person, and an AP is an authorised person.
That's correct, sir.
Right.
So there was nothing in the budget for it. Did that affect whether they were appointed?
There was establishment for maintenance managers within the budget, and the maintenance managers at that time, the role of RP or AP was inherent in their job description. It was just accepted that as part of that role that you would have a range of RP or AP related duties depending on what was required of you at that time. And what was missing was the actual amount of time, dedicated time to undertake the responsible persons and authorised persons' duties by that time. But the time of the production of that, there had started to be discussion within the board, certainly with me, Mr. Powery, Mr. Loudon and Mr. Gallagher, that there was a need for us to focus more on statutory compliance and compliance with SHTMs, etc. So therefore, our view was that there needed to be some dedicated resource, especially in a hospital the size of the QE, but that's not what was included in the business case. The business case was very much a replication of the way that we had previously been set up, and that those dedicated hours were not allocated in that way.
I see. And you then mentioned HAI related issues. So what's been missed out here?
So HAI related issues are day-to-day issues on the site which can compromise hospital acquired infection matters. Things like broken floor coverings, broken wall coverings, mastic around about showers and wash hand basins, tiles coming off, things that were ad hoc in nature but needed to be prioritised because they presented a potential infection control risk. Those are completed on an ad hoc basis, because whilst you can create a maintenance schedule at a frequency for some of those things, they very often happen on an ad hoc basis due to the operational demands of the hospital.
But what you're saying there is that they're addressed on an ad hoc basis, but
Yes.
in a site that size, what
We
you're
needed
saying
a
is
dedicated resource for that, yeah.
you need a dedicated resource. So you need to plan, as it were, for having a lot of these ad hoc things.
You do need to plan for that. And because of the size of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, it was the biggest hospital in NHS GGC, and I think indeed in NHS Scotland, or it was going to be, there was a recognition that we did actually need probably a small dedicated team to continuously go around the hospital addressing these things. And that wasn't part of the calculations either.
Yeah. And then you mentioned a few other items.
And again, when you say
Yes.
not part of the calculations, not part of the calculations in the full business case.
In both the full business case and in the subsequent resource papers that were presented by Mr. Loudon and Mr. Powery to the board. But these things were highlighted in the subsequent business case that was presented, that these had been omitted from the calculations and still needed to be considered.
If I just get to the end of the list first, and then I'll come back and ask you a question about this. There's backlog maintenance requirements to cope with extraordinary breakdowns and ad hoc requests for project work resulting from infrastructure issues. So are these all things that require estate's resource?
Yes, they are.
And just to help us understand what the issue was, somebody had deliberately omitted them or accidentally omitted them, or what?
No, they were recognised as not being part. The original business case, by recollection, and by looking at the evidence packs, etc., basically was built up on the inputs that were already there for the Demitton sites that were transferring to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So they were very, very broadly similar to what had been on the Demitton sites. There had been no work done to identify if on the Demitton sites, if the resource was adequate for those Demitton sites before they came to the QE, and then the assumption was made that because it was a new hospital that could go forward. The other challenge in that was that at FBC level, we had not done any work on estates resourcing. It had been done on the basis of a price per square metre, as opposed to there being a detailed workup of establishment.
Mr. Connell, it does occur to me there's quite a lot of material here, and certainly speaking for myself, if you could sort of bear that in mind, so that information comes in assimilable chunks.
Yes. So we're just trying to understand the point that you're obviously keen to make here. We know we've heard a lot about the pressures on the estates team, and we'll come back to that because you also deal with it in your statement. But you started that, if you look at the top of page 391, by saying that from the point of handover, estate structured were not fully staffed to meet the needs of the site.
Mm-hmm.
And are you trying to explain why it was that as it were, the cover wasn't there?
Yes, I am trying to describe why the cover wasn't there when we transferred.
And that's because a number of things hadn't been accounted for. You're telling
That's
us, is that
correct.
right?
Yes,
when
they
the
hadn't
costings were done.
Yes, that's correct. There were a number of things which weren't accounted for, and the resource business case that was later presented by Mr. Powery and Mr. Loudon trying to address that at the time was not approved. So there was a financial, there was no financial additional. There was no additional finance provided to close that gap. We retained the original Demitton site budgets minus the savings that had been identified in the FBC.
We're jumping about a little bit in time, but on page 391, you tell us about an event in August 2017. I think you'd been off work for some time just before that.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was it about 6 months you were off?
At that time, it was 6 months, yes.
Yeah. So you come back, this is August 2017. At that point, you're what? Are you in the associate role, or you're back in the interim role by August 17?
No, in August 17, I came back as associate director on a phase basis.
So you're coming back, and one of the things you're met with is Mr. Hunter, Mr. Parry, and Mr. Gallagher telling you that Mr. Loudon, who was the project director and then the designate head of estates, had agreed to a reduction in the estates
Yes, that's correct.
staffing.
That's what I was advised. I did subsequently raise that with Mr. Loudon, who did advise me that Mr. Gallagher had indeed written to him expressing concern about that, which he escalated to the chief executive. But that year's financial improvement plan for the board needed to be met, and therefore that was across all services.
So the issues with staffing problems were continuing still in 2017, is that right?
Yes, they were continuing in 2017. Some of that was compounded by the number of things that were happening in the hospital. So although there had been a forecast created for workforce planning, the number of things on the site during that period which were going wrong, or we found challenges with in getting systems to work and speak to each other, was also a compounding factor to the establishment that we did have. So that brought an extra complexity and an extra stress to the estate staff.
Thank you. Well, we're going to come back to that because you do deal with that more fully in your statement. Can I ask you to move to 393, where you were being asked about your different roles, just so we're clear about these. And the first thing that you tell us on 393 is that your role as interim director, which you started in 2014, involved participation in a number of board assurance groups. Now, we've heard about the water safety group. Were there any other particular ones that might be of interest to this inquiry that you were members of?
I attended the Board Infection Control Committee as the representative for estates and facilities, and I first started doing that when I took up the interim director role and continued that right through. I was a member of the board health and safety group. There was a range of assurance groups like staff governance groups, etc., but they weren't directly related to water. Obviously, there were finance meetings, etc., that were occurring routinely. There were a number of governance groups that I attended routinely, and the lists there, things like the internal meetings that we also had within the estates and facilities team, which were around statutory compliance group, partnership group, which was involvement with staff side colleagues. There was an operational management group which consisted of all of the senior managers, where we looked at performance within the directorate and discussed performance using a balanced scorecard. So there were a number of assurance groups which I attended on a range of subjects, and sometimes by invitation to discuss a particular subject.
Now, if you were invited to attend, would that be because of the position you held or because of any particular expertise that you held?
It was position. All of the governance groups were due to the position that I held.
And a small point in that paragraph there, you I think draw a distinction between when you were interim director, preparing board papers, but when you're associate director, simply inputting to them. What
That's
are we talking about here that you as associate director would input into?
Into the presentations, for instance, on hospital cleanliness, into the health and safety. I would collate information from that were health and safety related in nature for the health and safety group and so forth. So I did not attend and present any of the papers, but if I was asked to, or routinely in some cases, particularly around about the domestic services information, then that would be produced just routinely by myself and others.
Thank you. Okay, can we look at page 394? I wanted to ask you a couple of things here. You're, on the face of it, you're interim director of estates. That's what you were called, that's what your position was. But you say here that it was made clear to you, and I'll ask first of all, who by? Who made you clear what the limits of your role were?
The chief executive of the health board was clear in what my role and remit was.
Was that Mr. Calderwood?
Yes, that was.
And you say that he told you that although you were interim director, your role didn't extend into the project team. That's what was working on the new hospital.
That's correct.
Or technical advice on subjects you were not qualified to advise on. Did you have any particular technical skills at that point?
I had technical skills in soft FM, and because that was my background, but I had not managed estates for any length of time. My only experience in managing estates at an operational level had been for a couple of years at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, where I was the general manager for North Glasgow and had Ian Powery, who was the head of maintenance, reporting to me about the day-to-day maintenance issues in that hospital and in that sector at that time. So no, I had no technical background in estates.
Yeah. Can I just ask you this, just while we're on that page? You mentioned the project team. Did you have occasion during either of your roles, or any of your roles to be precise, to come, particularly in 2014 to 2015, to come across a firm called Curry and Brown?
Yes, I was aware of Curry and Brown. I had worked with Curry and Brown in a previous project around about the board's catering strategy, so I was aware of the company. And then the project team announced that Curry and Brown had been awarded technical advisors to the board. So yes, I was aware of Curry and Brown and the project team relationship.
So you were told they were the technical advisors?
That was my understanding.
Okay. One of the themes that comes through from various parts of your witness statement is, and this is my word, not yours, what I might describe as the responsiveness of Mr. Loudon, who was initially project director. Is this something that you encountered, that there was some issue as to how well he was responding to concerns raised with him?
Yes, but to be fair, to be fair, when Mr. Loudon took up post, there was not a lot of interaction with Mr. Loudon as the project director. But when things were being escalated to him as we approached opening and then post-opening of the hospital, I did not find Mr. Loudon to be particularly responsive round about the issues that were being raised that were of concern to the operational team. It felt like an uphill struggle to get our points across about how issues were impacting the operational delivery of services at local level. And whilst I was associate director, we spent very little time together discussing operational matters. The bulk of the conversations I had with Mr. Loudon related to the QE, and there was little discussion about the board-wide responsibilities and the other hospitals.
You actually say in your witness statement that you didn't get the impression that Mr. Loudon was very interested in operational matters. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Because of that lack of interaction between myself and him around operational matters, Mr. Loudon seemed to be more focused on capital projects, procurement and board matters than he was on operational delivery of the services on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, if we just move your screen forward to page 396, that's where you asked that question. I wonder if I could ask you a supplementary question then. If Mr. Loudon, holding the position he did, wasn't particularly interested in operational matters, did this have any impact on how things were dealt with as matters progressed?
It meant that everything was left to myself to support the maintenance managers, the general managers in the delivery of services, and to make decisions round about how we would progress matters that were of concern and of risk.
I think on the same page, you list a number of the people you were dealing with, and I needn't ask you to go through that again, but you're making a point there that you didn't really think you had enough time to do a proper job of communicating with them. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. I felt that I was extremely stretched, and the people that are listed on there cover various positions in the board-wide, and you can see from the range of services and the range of managers that there were a number of areas to be covered in terms of the geography, the number of buildings to be covered, and it became really, really difficult. I felt that I never had enough time to provide the right level of scrutiny on documentation or to provide the right level of support when it was needed. And that was an area in my role that I struggled with and compensated for by working longer hours and more days a week to try to address that.
Just clarify my thinking. Mr. Loudon had been the project director, and at the end of the project, he took up the position of estates director for the whole board.
That's correct.
That's correct. Was it, now the handover of the hospital was January 2015, so is that the date at which Mr. Loudon became director, or was it later?
I think there were. I don't think. No, it didn't happen. It didn't happen in January 2015. Mr. Loudon maintained his role as project director and took responsibility for a number of things that were ongoing on the QE site, like the defect period and the mobilisation actually of the site before patients transferred in. So it was later in 2015 that happened, that he stepped in as a substantive Estates and Facilities Director. I don't remember what month that was, sir, but it was probably autumn time 2015, I think.
Now, the questions that you're answering from Mr. Connell, to the effect that Mr. Loudon was more interested in capital projects and procurement, is a reference to this period after autumn 2015, once he was the director and you were the associate director.
That's correct.
Right, thank you.
I want to, as we've just touched on it, I want to just move to 398, because what crops up on 398 is the actual handover of the building, which, as you pointed out to us, was January 2015. Now, here you are, you're in post for a while as interim head of estates, and you're asked, well, presumably this was quite a big thing that was going on, and did somebody brief you about it? And you're told, you say no. Is that the correct position? At the top of page 398?
In 2014, when I took on the role of interim director?
Not so much in 2014, but as the date for handover was approaching, in January 2015, were you briefed on what was going on?
Yes. So as the date approached for commissioning and patient transfer, yes, I was briefed on what the dates were anticipated for patient transfer, and asked to create a work plan roundabout, in particular soft FM, for that to happen. So yes, I was briefed, but I wasn't briefed on the technical handover. So I had no knowledge of what was happening with the infrastructure commissioning and the technical components of the board. My focus was primarily on soft FM and getting the building ready to be occupied by patients.
Halfway down that page, you do express what you've described there as a nervousness, I might call it a concern, that was striking you. Was that at that time when the handover was just coming up?
No, I think Sir, I've answered that question on the basis of how I felt in 2014 when I was asked to take on the role of interim director, because yes, I think that is what I've done there, by the way that I've responded to that. So that was my concern when I was asked to take on the role in 2014 of the interim director, that I was extremely nervous about my background and my experience. In terms of the handover of the building, there was a programme developed and a series of work plans developed to support that based on when patients would be moving into the hospital. So at that point, I was not worried about the handover of the building. I became worried about the handover of the building when the keys were handed over to us in January 2015 and the building was supposed to be ready, and then unexpectedly there were several hundred contractors appeared the next morning to be signed in and come in and complete various pieces of work in relation to the hospital. That's when I began to be concerned about the state of readiness that we were in.
I think you say in that paragraph that your focus was on soft FM, and supporting commissioning and migration of patients, and you were told that you were to rely on the technical experts, and then you're asked, well, who are these technical experts you're to rely on, and you produce a list, including Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Powery, and also Mr. Hunter, Karen Connolly, and so on, who have different areas of responsibility. But at that time, so you were told you'd not to be involved with the project, but you were to have some kind of role in the handover of the building, is that right?
That's correct.
But not on the technical side,
No,
such as water and ventilation.
that's correct.
And I think you're asked on the next page whether you knew anything about the maximum temperature decision that had been made in relation to the new hospital, and you say you weren't told anything about that.
Not that I can recall.
Or the decision to change the ventilation levels from what was in the guidance.
No.
And then you asked a question about Ward 4B, which I think we can leave aside for the moment. And in fact, what you then go on to do on page 400 of your statement is to explain one of the points that His Lordship was looking for earlier, which is, well, how long were you interim director? And then when did you go back into being interim director? And you tell us there, late 2017, Mr. Loudon was leaving the organisation, and you picked up the baton again, as it were.
Yes.
On an interim basis.
From January 2018, yeah.
Thank you. So if we just follow that through for the moment, we're into 2017. You're being asked to go back into post as interim director. And I think you're being asked on page 401, you're having to take over for Mr. Loudon again, or I'm saying again, actually technically for the first time you're taking over from him.
Yes.
Were you concerned at the time? But you say you weren't concerned, but you felt overwhelmed. Can you just help us to understand what the issue was at that point?
I had acted into the role before on an interim basis, and I understood that acting on an interim basis, I was expected to maintain operational delivery. So from understanding what was required of me from the organisation, I wasn't concerned. It was a short-term interim arrangement, which was I was assured would be a short-term arrangement, and it was. However, because of what was happening at the QE and across the board to a lesser extent, because my duties did cover the whole board, I did feel overwhelmed about what was potentially in front of me. However, I didn't expect there to be the series of events that then unfolded immediately after I went into that role. So on one level, I wasn't concerned because I knew what the organisation's expectation of me was as a senior manager during that interim period. But on the other hand, because I knew what was happening at the QE and the challenges that were being faced there on an ongoing basis, I felt overwhelmed on a personal basis, yes.
Yeah. And in 2017, you'd actually been off for quite a long time, not at work at all.
That's correct.
And then when you try to get back up to speed, you're told by a number of your reports that they've got concerns about the new hospital. Is that right?
That's correct. When I returned from sick leave, I came back in August, and on a phased basis, I agreed a set work plan with Mr. Loudon when I came back before I resumed my full range of duties, which I think my full range of duties was resumed in around about October 2017. But when I returned from sick leave, Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Powery and Mr. Hunter expressed concerns to me about the situation at the QE and the number of defects and issues that were impacting operationally on delivery of services.
We're going to come back to that point in a short time, but am I right in thinking that these were not issues that had just suddenly sprung to light in August 17? These were issues that had been around for some time?
These were issues that had been ongoing since we transferred into the hospital, yes.
Thank you. Now, as I say, we'll come back to what was done about that, because you're asked on page 401, what did you do about it? And you said you put them together in a document and it was taken forward. But you've dealt with that in more detail a little later in your statement. Can I just ask you a general question I've been asked to put to you? In 2017, was you come back in to harness again, as it were, on a stage basis, and then you ultimately take up the post at the very end of the year? Do you recollect any discussions in 2017 about any link between patient infections and the environment?
In 2017?
Yes.
In 2017, when I returned from sick leave, the only discussion that I remember about that was when I returned, Mr. Loudon advised me that there was a whistleblowing complaint being dealt with due to concerns about the built environment by the microbiologist, and in particular there were concerns around ventilation and water, and that I wasn't to get involved in it if I was asked or requests were made for information, because it was being dealt with by the whistleblowing group that had been agreed. So in 2017, I became aware that there were concerns being voiced by the clinical teams, but that these were being taken forward by the most senior management team in the board.
Were you chair of the water safety group throughout the whole period we're discussing?
Well, I wasn't at work, so
Right.
so
Apart from when
so,
you were off.
Apart from when I was at work, yes.
Did that give you a responsibility to report, as it were, that the board was complying with what it needed to comply with on water safety?
Yes.
And how did you go about doing that? Can you remember? Because obviously water, as we know, became an issue.
Yeah. I tried to present reports to the Board Infection Control Committee about the built environment, and they were taken off the agenda by the medical director who chaired the group, because she felt it wasn't an appropriate place for them to be coming, that there were no building experts in the Board Infection Control Committee, and therefore there should be a separate route for that type of information to be disseminated.
But I suspect we'll come back to talk about water a bit later, Ms. Kane.
Can I just maybe go for that again? You were the chair when you were at work of the Water Safety Group. As chair of the Water Safety Group, you proposed to bring a report or bring reports on a regular basis to the Infection
Yes.
Control Committee,
Yes.
the Board Infection Control Committee.
Yes.
But that suggestion was turned down by the medical director.
Who was the chair of the PICC?
Right. Was any alternative method of reporting from the water safety group to the board or a board subcommittee substituted for your suggestion, which had been turned down?
No.
No. Right. Thank you.
Okay, let me come back, because that's the way that the witness statement goes, to staffing issues. 403, you asked about concerns about staff, and you say that your main concern was that key staff were under continuous stress. Is that people working in the new hospital?
Yes.
And you were head of estates. Was there nothing you could do to change that position under which they were working under constant stress?
I tried on a day-to-day basis by providing support. However, the only way that I could have, the situation could have been alleviated was by more resources and more funding. And we'd already been told that there was no funding, so we tried collectively to manage activity on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis as a team.
Do you know whether that meant that things that should have been done didn't get done when they should have been done in the hospital?
Can you say that again, please?
Yes, apologies. As a result of the stress on resources that you've been explaining, were there things that needed done in the hospital that just didn't get done at the right time?
Yes, there were. We were slow to respond to faults. We were slow to respond to tasks being closed out. We very often made things safe rather than bringing them back into full use, and then had to bring in a third-party supplier. We relied quite heavily on third-party suppliers to come in and supplement us on a range of topics.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's a point of fairness to you pick up. On 403, you explain that attempts had been made to get more funding and they'd not worked because the chief executive had basically said there's no more money. And then on 404, you say that one of the things you did was, if you can't get more staff money, you might be able to get money to bring in third-party contractors. What kind of contractors are we talking about?
Well, one of the big areas of expenditure was round about not in 2015, I have to say, but as time progressed, was round about the provision of water services and water support from a third party contractor. We general building trades to catch up on HEI. We were putting that out in lots to try to stay on top of HEI works. We used various contractors for various things when they arose to supplement the estates team.
Again, just so that I'm keeping up, you use the expression HAIs. Is that a reference to what you explained earlier about the, I think you used the word ad hoc failures, tiles,
Yes, that's right, sir.
things like that, right? And as I think you explained earlier, the reason that you use the initials HEI, that's hospital-acquired infections.
Yes.
Is it that you recognise that such maintenance matters, such ad hoc failures, can give rise to infection risk?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Right. Just so that I'm keeping up. I think you've explained that, but I just want to make sure where we are. Sorry, Mr. Conlon.
Understood, Lord. Now, I'm now going to come to a topic that you touched on a little earlier, because I know one of the other parties said, well, where's the detail of this? And the detail we'll come to now. You asked about halfway down page 404, did you do anything about these problems, basically? And you say you went to see Mr. Loudon about the pressure that the staff were under, and all the stuff that was having to be done. And you say two things then happened. One, there was a change of geographic responsibility to provide some breathing space for the general manager. Was that give Mr. Hunter more time or less time? How did that work?
It gave him more time. We rotated the general management positions because Mr. Loudon acknowledged that actually it had been demanding and challenging in the sector for a period of time, and that me being off sick had further compounded that. So the most difficult and challenging sector to run and manage, in my opinion, was the QE at that time. So moving the general managers around gave a bit of respite to those who had been directly involved at the QE for a few years at that point, 2 years, and that had been probably the most challenging time. And we subsequently rotated and changed that background again. So the idea was to give a bit of breathing space, so that there would be less hours worked, that there would be more ability to focus on given topics, and just really to give a break to the managers that had been involved.
I think you tell us here that you had concerns about the pressure on you as opposed to the pressure on others. Is that right?
I had concerns about the pressure on me and others, but on myself, yeah, I can speak for myself.
Yeah. And what you went to Mr. Loudon, and you say you also went to HR to see if you could do something about that. You were asking for a compressed working week.
That was for myself, yes.
How would that have helped?
Well, it would have helped me on a personal basis. I had been off work for a period of time, and I recognised that I was probably coming back to the same environment as that I had left, and felt, how could I restrict the number of hours I was working in a working week? One of the ways to do that is to be at work less. The easiest way to do that would have been to compress the hours. I was already working in 4 days, my full contracted hours anyway. I was doing considerably over my contracted hours, and on the advice of my GP, who felt that it would be useful for me in terms of my own health if I could work a compressed week. So I made the request. It would have helped me on a personal basis.
But you didn't get a favourable response to your request?
No, I didn't. I was advised that the post that I had substantively was a 5-day a week post, and that I required to fulfil that, and that the workload at the QE wasn't going to change anytime soon. It was what it was, and therefore I needed to return to work on a 5-day basis, which I duly did.
The other thing that you did was that you raised a number of issues which had been passed to you by Mr. Hunter, Mr. Perry, and Mr. Gallagher with Mr. Loudon. Now, again, I take it these are issues that were not new ones that had just sprung up in 2017. These were ones that had been around for some time. Is that correct?
Yes, they had. Most of these issues, however, when I had went off sick, we were expecting to be completed by 2017. So there was a period, a 2-year defect period for rectification of issues. So by 2017, we were anticipating that these issues would have been addressed by the project team and multiplex, etc. And when I returned in 2017, I was advised that things had not progressed significantly while I had been off.
And who was supposed to be responsible for making things happen when Mr. Hunter or Mr. Perry or Mr. Gallagher were complaining about stuff? Who were they complaining to?
They indicated that they had raised these things with Mr. Loudon, and that they felt that they hadn't been acted on. However, when I got them to pull together the list and I took it to Mr. Loudon responded immediately to that and set up a meeting with Multiplex. So I'm actually not sure, while I was off, what the communication was that had occurred between them.
The issues that were taken up, and I think the inquiry knows something about some of these, and some of them are also dealt with later in your witness statement. You deal with on page 405, about a third of the way down, the lack of asset tagging, Zootech content, and how it was impacting operational service delivery, lack of CAFM, that's the idea of a planned preventative maintenance system. That was just the label that was given. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
well,
then,
Mr. Connell, when you say that that's the label given to it, I may be misremembering it. Is CAFM not an acronym relating to a computerized management system? Or have I got that wrong?
the witness is about to give you an answer, my lord.
You're correct, my lord. It's the CAFM system is the computerized FM system where you store your PPMs, your compliance with the PPMs, and it allows you to input all of your assets and match your workforce to the tasks that have been pre-programmed into the CAFM system.
Right. And the system that you're talking about in 2017 is the system that continues to be used on the QE campus. Am I right?
The CAFM system that we use, that was in use in the QE system, yes, that was a system that had been in pre-existence in the board. And when we discovered that there was no new CAFM system coming with the hospital, we rolled the existing system into the QE.
Right. Thank you.
Now, you say Mr. Loudon arranged a meeting with Multiplex. Were you involved in that meeting?
Yes.
And you say halfway down 405 that asset tags were found, asset tagging commenced. This did not go well. What do you mean by that?
It did not go well in the context that the asset labels were falling off of the assets, that they were wrongly tagged, matched to the room numbers. The room numbers that should have been linked to the asset tags, not all the doors were tagged. So it became chaotic for the estates team to use what was in place, and eventually they took over and developed a local system that made it more comprehensive and easier for them to understand then where the assets were, what the assets were, and then start to develop PPM schedules for those.
Could I just clarify in my own mind? An asset tag is a way of identifying a physical thing. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you refer in your statement to a program of attaching tags to physical things in 2017. Do I understand the position to be that before 2017, there were simply no asset tags to identify specific pieces of equipment in the campus?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Now, again, we're touching on some topics that we'll return to on page 405. Asset tagging has just been put to you by its lordship. And then in the same paragraph, you're asking about CAFM, and then you're being told that Zutec was basically what you were going to get. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you're also told that Zutec was fully populated as per the contract, and if there were any difficulty, it was due to the operational teams, presumably that's the state's operational teams' competence in using the system.
That's correct.
Who was telling you that the team were not competent to use Zutec?
Mr. Loudon said on several occasions that the system was fully populated and any issues connected to accessing information were due to the team not being able to use the system effectively.
And the position, as I understand it from your witness statement, is that your team were telling you that Mr. Loudon hadn't really been listening to them, but when you got involved, something happened.
Yes, in terms of yes. When they told me they didn't feel listened to, but when I did go and raise it with Mr. Loudon and took the list of issues that were identified to me by Mr. Gallagher, Powery, and Hunter, Mr. Loudon did listen and then arranged a meeting.
Thank you. Well, let's come back to your own position, because that's one of the topics that's next dealt with in your witness statement. Could you asked on page 407 what training you'd had for your role in estates, and you basically say none. What qualifications you had, any specific qualifications? The answer is none. And then you explain the experience that you did have. Then you asked if you had any formal training in respect of water, and the answer is no. Notwithstanding that you were to be chair of the water group, and it turned out also a designated person for water. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now on 408, you tell us that the first training you got was in 2019 when you did a Legionella awareness course.
That's correct.
And what I think you're setting out in the next part of your statement of 408 is your explanation of the way the NHS works, that quite often you have a person without technical qualifications running a team where people have more technical knowledge. Is that basically what you're trying to set out there?
That's correct. I'm trying to describe that it's not unusual. It's not unusual in estates and facilities for the director or the assistant director to come from one of the disciplines within the broader estates and facilities categorisation and not be a technical expert. Most commonly, the estates director is someone from a hard FM background, usually either an engineer or a surveyor to background, and they don't have the experience of soft FM or decontamination or procurement, depending on what's sitting in estates and facilities. In my case, I came from a soft FM background and had no background in hard FM at all. But the management structure was set up in such a way that there should have been enough technical advisors around me for me able to be advised by them in their roles and in their positions of authority within each of the sectors.
And so what you've said in that page is that in a general sense, the fact that you were not an engineer or water specialist or whatever didn't bother you, but you'd say it did come to bother you when the water incident took place in the hospital. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. On a day-to-day basis, in terms of workload, I don't feel, not coming from that background, impacted me directly. However, it did impact me in relation to water. And when the incident at the QE became clear to me, yes, it caused me a great deal of personal stress, and I felt very vulnerable and frustrated that, not coming from that technical background, I couldn't challenge any of the hypotheses that were being put before me, and had to work on the basis that there was professional consensus amongst the people who were technical experts advising me, and that's how I tried to compensate for that. The other thing that I had done in 2015, after discussion with Mr. Lauder, was identify that there was a need for a general manager type role across the estates team to be able to coordinate a standardised approach to the delivery of estates and technical matters related to that. And we created the position of the general manager for estates and the deputy general manager for estates. Those posts came into existence in 2016, and then after that there was a compliance team established in the board to try to get some traction on these issues and to move forward.
Yeah, I think that was compliance team, I think, was probably a little later on, possibly 2016, something like that.
Yes, that's correct. The general manager and the deputy general manager came into post in 2016, and that'd be around about the time the compliance team was created.
Yeah. Now, at the foot of page 408, you say, well, have you had any roles or duties in relation to water systems? And you say, well, when you became interim director, you discovered that you were the designated person for water. It sounds as if it came as a bit of a surprise to you.
I had no understanding that that was something that was expected of me, and had not been aware of the previous director of estates and facilities carrying out that role. So yes, it was news to me that I was expected to fulfil that role in that post.
And did you understand that that was one of the roles with specific labels on it in this sort of statutory controls? There was authorised persons, responsible persons, designated person. Did you understand that at the time?
No, the only knowledge that I had at that time was from the development of the board water safety policy, which Mr. Gallagher led on. There had been a number of different water policies across the board, and there was a need to develop a single water policy for standardisation purposes. And when that policy was created, I began to understand that there was a role there, and that was the first time that I'd heard that that was an expectation.
What did you do to, as it were, if I may respectfully use the expression, educate yourself in relation to the role of a designated person?
I started to read documentation on water safety, and I started to read SHTMs, not just about water safety. I realised then that there was a role I was expected to fulfil on a range of actual technical topics, which I had been totally unaware of. That role came, those roles came with the post. And I started to read and understand that the SHTMs were more than had been described to me by the general managers and the estates maintenance managers, that the role of the director of estates and facilities had a statutory responsibility. I did ask, in particular, Mr. Gallagher, when I saw my name in the designated person box, do I not need to be trained for that role? What courses can I go on? And I was advised that I didn't need to worry about that at this stage, that the responsible persons who were the estates managers were well versed in water safety management and compliance with the SHGMs, that the designated person water was a management role, in that I would only be required to sign off on authorised persons who they would intimate to me as they were put in place.
Right. But
So I
despite,
never undertook any courses.
right. But you did read,
I did try, yes.
right. And you understood that it was the designated person's responsibility to make appointments.
I did through time, yes. I don't think I understood immediately that it was my responsibility. I don't think that actually connected, so to speak. People were being referred to as authorised persons, and I trusted the responsible persons, and I trusted Mr. Gallagher, having been the previous water safety lead, that if there was a requirement for me to do anything in regard to that I would be advised. It was only through time that I began to discover that there was more to the role than even as it was described by then, in particular, Mr. Gallagher to me. And then I realised that, yes, it was the responsibility of the designated person and to ensure that the training was being done with the APs. Yes. But that took time. I wasn't aware of that. I was aware I had a role, but I did not have the necessary understanding of exactly what was involved in that role and the statutory responsibility that came with it.
This is probably an impossible question to answer. When do you think you acquired that understanding? 2016?
I would say it was round about that time, yes.
Thank you.
Now, you will just move on to 409 because that's where you give largely the description that you've just given to his lordship. And then immediately beneath that paragraph, you're in effect asked, and I think you're aware there's an issue about the appointment of authorised persons for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, with responsibility for that hospital. But your position is that you didn't do anything about appointments at that time because you didn't understand that that was for you to be on top of.
That's correct, sir.
And I think we know there were no appointments that covered the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for some years after it had opened. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You're asked on page 410, this is a specific point that arose from evidence earlier in the inquiry. I think Mr. Perry told us that he'd filled up some kind of sheet with suggested names and given it to you, assuming you would do something with it. And what you did with it is set out, I think, on page 410, that you issued it to the staff member copying in the responsible person. Who was the responsible person? Do you remember?
It was either Mr. Powery or Andy Wilson at the time. I think it would have been Mr. Powery if it was before 2016. If it was after 2016, it would have been
But at
Andy
that point,
Wilson.
you didn't actually make sure that APs were appointed. Is that correct? That wasn't
That's
something
correct.
you were doing at that time.
No. No, what was provided with was a template to fill in and complete and issue to the employee and the responsible person. And on that advice, I issued those letters as they came to me.
Yeah, and you say further down page 410, the way you put it is, my understanding of the role now is very different from what it was then. Now, His Lordship asked you, when did you come to understand that the role potentially had things attached to it that you needed to do? Was that 2016, 2017? Do you remember? I think you told his lordship possibly 2016.
Yeah, 2016 I began to realise that the role of designated person wasn't only a management role, that there were expectations of that role, and they were part of the guidance. I think I only really understood the full role and understood more fully water safety through the learning of the water incident at the QE.
Right.
I acquired a lot of knowledge.
When you use the expression not just a management role, can you sort of tease that out a little bit? What is just a management role?
Just a management role in this context would mean that I would only act on the advice given to me by the technical managers because of the position that I occupied, rather than being an active participant in the development and the delivery of such matters.
Thank you.
And at the top of 411, you say again, my understanding of the role was very different from what it was then. What if we're trying to think of things that, with the benefit of hindsight, might be done better? What would have helped you when you found yourself appointed? What could you have been given or asked for that would have made a difference?
I could have undertaken training. There are now various courses available round about water safety and water safety management. I could have participated in them, and I think that would have helped. I could have reached out to HFS, and I didn't do this, to ask them if they could support training me because of the position that I was in. And I think that would have helped greatly.
I think in fairness to you, with the benefit of hindsight, about halfway down page 411, you now accept that you weren't filling that role, a designated water person, at the time appropriately.
That's correct.
Based on obviously the hindsight that you now have, and that you should have been doing a bit more about it. But you also say in that paragraph that the first 2 years at the site, so that's what, 2015, 2017, is that right? That the years you're referring to there, due to the defects issue, would have made it difficult to get anything done anyway. Is that the message you're trying to give us? So I'm looking at the middle.
Yes. What I'm trying to describe here is that those who were fulfilling the roles of APs and RPs, and even myself, because of the first 2 years in particular, and it carried on beyond that, but the first 2 years were particularly difficult and challenging because there were unexpected events happening on a daily basis that we would not have expected to have happened and could not have actually predicted would happen if things had gone entirely to plan and in accordance with SHTM design, etc. It would have been difficult for them to fulfil the roles in any case due to time.
Thank you. Well, I'm conscious of time. This might be as good a point to break.
Ms. Kane, as I said, we usually take a coffee break about 11:30. So could I ask you to be back in front of your screen for 10 to 12?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, Miss Kane, you can hear me,
Yes, I can, sir.
and we can hear you very clearly. Thank you. Mr. Kong.
Can I just check, Ms. Kane, due to an issue with the systems, I think somebody may have picked up that you were having a conversation with someone during the break. Now, I did. Was that the PA lady that you were chatting to?
No, it was the witness support on MS Teams spoke to me.
Oh, is that the witness support team from the inquiry?
Yes, sir.
Because I think you probably know that once you start giving your evidence, we have to make sure that no one is chatting to you about the content of what you're saying. You understand all of that, I take it.
I do understand that.
Thank you very much. The next topic I just want to touch on is the state of the hospital at the time it was handed over from the contractor to the board. You were asked in the course of your witness statement to look at a defects list, but you said that you hadn't seen that before. In your capacity as head of estates, with this major project reaching a particular milestone, the handing over of the building, would you have expected to know even roughly what state the building was in at that stage?
I think what I said in my witness statement was when I looked at the defect list, I didn't immediately recognise or remember it, but I absolutely must have had. I absolutely must have seen it because I know that I participated in trying to resolve some of the defects.
So just so we know where that is, on page 413 of your witness statement, near the foot, when you've been asked to look at the defects list, and you said you hadn't seen it before, but then you go back to the point you made earlier that you remember a large number of what you described as contractor staff turning up in January to do work.
That's correct.
You say there the local team felt that shouldn't have been the case if the hospital was ready for handover. Who do you mean by the local team? Is that the local estates team?
Estates and facilities team. The facilities team were also included in that. It felt that if the hospital was ready, there were a significant amount of contractors brought onto site and a significant number of things which were visible that we would have thought would have been addressed before handover.
I think the position that Multiplex take is that the project team were happy with the state of the building and happy to take it on. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that would be true. Only the project team could have signed off on the building for handover.
The suggestion also is that a lot of the works going on after handover might have been related to equipment being installed by GGC, which was not within the Multiplex contract. Is that what you were seeing?
No, that's not what I'm referring to. But that is true. There was equipment being fitted that hadn't been part of the multiplex. So I recognise the fact that was happening in the hospital. But what I'm referring to is the issues that were happening on an ongoing basis, like the hospital temperature, for instance, not being consistent, being warm and then cool, lights that wouldn't switch off, fire doors coming off their hinges, those types of things. Building issues are what I'm referring to, not the equipment issues.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to an associated question, 415. you're asked whether you saw documentation about commissioning and validation of the water and ventilation systems at the time of handover. And you say, no, that wasn't your job. You understood that was for the project team. Is that right?
Yes.
And then you say you were advised that this had happened by Mr. Loudon.
Yes.
So what was he telling you?
So Mr. Loudon advised that the hospital had been handed over and all of the systems had been checked and were ready to go. So Mr. Loudon didn't actually specify ventilation has been commissioned and validated, and here are a copy of the results or anything like that. However, as the incoming Director of Estates and Facilities, I not for 1 minute thought that things would not be addressed appropriately, and was advised that the ventilation and the water system had been signed off, in particular by Dr. Craig Williams, and were ready to go for us to take occupation of the hospital.
Are we referring to here simply a conversation between you and Mr. Loudon?
Yes, there was no exchange of documentation at all.
And the language that Mr. Loudon was using was sign off or good to go. So he may or may not have used the expressions commissioning or validation.
He didn't use those expressions.
Thank you.
And in terms of sign off by Dr. Williams in your witness statement, you talk about Dr. Williams signing off the water system after a series of microbiological tests. Is that what you're referring to, or did you think he had done something about ventilation as well?
Yes, I thought he had participated in the sign-off of ventilation. Dr. Williams was the chair of the ventilation assurance group within NHSGC and the infection control doctor who tended to lead on built environment at that time. My understanding was that the water system and ventilation system, in order to be signed off, needed to have been approved by Dr. Williams in his capacity as infection control doctor.
Now, at page 417, you in effect asked a question, the short version of which, well, you were head of estates. Was it not your job to make sure that the commissioning and validation which was necessary had been done? And your answer is, no, that was the job of Mr. Loudon. Is that right?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And then you explain, I think in the middle of 417, that historically in the board, what happened is that the capital team, like the project team, presumably, completed the work and supplied the commissioning and validation assurances. Presumably there's paperwork for that.
Yes.
To the local operational teams, and the local operational teams then do verification, which is with certain areas of ventilation, an annual exercise. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So that was what you were assuming had been happening, is that right?
I assumed that the project team, to the point of handover, would ensure that all of the commissioning and validation and pre-occupancy risk assessments of any kind would be completed and handed over with the O&M manuals and the keys basically to the building. And I therefore did not instruct any of those works and was not asked to instruct them or be involved in them. So it was my assumption that that was absolutely the role of the project team up until the building was handed over to operational estates.
I suppose the only question that I might add to that, if you don't mind, is that if you know from the way things were usually done, that you need to do an annual verification of certain areas of the ventilation, which, as I understand it, is based on it having been validated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Should you, or could you have said to Mr. Loudon, well, thanks very much, David, can you send a copy of the results to my office so I've got them when I need them?
Yes, in hindsight, I should have asked to see the evidence. However, I had no experience of it working any other way than the appropriate way where this would follow through time. I knew that the contract documentation, this type of information and some of the other information would need to be populated on Zootech for us to be able to access. And I didn't ask for copies of them, but I should have. And in future, if I was involved in such a project, I would want to physically see these myself.
Can I just ask, one question I forgot to ask you at the start is, what are you doing at the moment?
I'm General Manager for Property and Support Services Division in NHS Lanarkshire.
Thank you. I just didn't have a note of it on my file. That's my fault entirely. I should have asked you that much earlier on. Now, in subsequent pages of your witness statement, and this is probably the fault of those who asked you the questions, not you, the topics jump around a little bit. At 418, we pick up this question of Zootech, whether it was fully populated. And you record at the top of 418, Mr. Loudon, I think that is, telling you, no, it's all okay. It's the team that isn't familiar with it. Is that what the team were telling you? The estates people who are having to use it?
The estates team who were having to use it were advising me that it was not fully populated, that there were missing documentation and documentation was in the wrong files. So therefore, when they looked for a document, what they would often find would be that the wrong model, the wrong specification had been uploaded to Zootech, or that the documentation was stored in another part of Zootech. So they had to look for absolutely everything that they needed. There were limited as fitted drawings in areas. When I raised that with Mr. Loudon, he advised that the system was fully populated in accordance with the contract, and that it was down to the estate's maintenance team being unfamiliar with the system and not being able to navigate the system.
Right. And at 418, at the third paragraph, you say, Mr. Loudon told you that this was due to estate's unfamiliarity, and you say he'd been advised with the board's technical advisors it was complete. Then you mentioned Curry and Brown. Were you told something by Curry and Brown about Zootech?
Curry and Brown also advised me that Zootech had been fully populated. I did raise it on a couple of occasions when I met individuals who worked for them, and I particularly remember a conversation occurring during a meeting to discuss the CHP and how that was being progressed, when I raised the issue in the meeting and was advised that it was indeed populated. It was only when HFS, who were participating in the CHP meeting from a technical perspective at that time, advised Curry and Brown that they had been given access to the system and had found that the issues that I was raising with Curry and Brown at that time were factually correct. That it appeared to me we then were starting to be listened to, and slowly the Zootech system seemed to be populated. People got access who previously hadn't had access to the system despite requesting it. I felt that in terms of Zootech, it would have been a great assistance to the local estates team if Zootech had been appropriately populated at the start when we moved over into the hospital, because that was supposed to be the repository for operational manuals, system design information, It's where you should have been able to go and find the validation and commissioning data. So all of that type of information should have been within Zootech for us to be able to go and look for and interrogate and look back on, but it wasn't. And we certainly felt that we weren't listened to in that respect.
Can you recollect who it was in Curry and Brown who you spoke to?
Douglas Ross.
Douglas Ross. Thank you.
Essentially what you're saying is whatever the contractual position may or may not have been, it would have been helpful to estates to have as fully a populated Zootech at handover as was possible.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And some of the discussions that you mentioned were about the CHP plant. Now, I don't want to ask you lots of material about the CHP plant, but you mentioned hospital temperatures were a problem. We've heard previously from other witnesses about the need for the heating plant to control water temperatures for infection purposes. But was there a wider problem about heating and cooling in the hospital?
It was linked to the CHP. So there were, particularly when we moved in, numerous reports from wards and departments that the temperature was extremely high in those areas and was causing distress to patients. There were areas where the cooling was also coming on and the area was too cool. The CHP and the link to water temperatures is something that was explored with the water technical group, and it was the view of the water technical group that there had been temperature excursions since before the hospital had opened. However, when we went to try and get that factual data, the building management system had there had been a software glitch and most of the archive files had disappeared, so there was no way for us to verify that. But we were aware that there had been temperature excursions and felt that that was a contributory factor to the water incident.
Okay, you've jumped forward a little bit. Let me just jump back in the gap that gives me. I have a note here which I'd completely forgotten about, that you'd been told by the medical director not to bring your issues, building related issues, to the BICC. Who was that?
Dr. Jennifer Armstrong.
Okay. Right. Now, there were obviously discussions about this issue about cooling and other things about the CHP. Now, I'm right in thinking from your statement that it was you that then suggested an external third party be brought in to do a report on it.
It was suggested actually to me because we were not progressing from the NHS side the issues that had been identified, and Curry and Brown and multiplex representatives were of the view that they had done everything that was required to have the CHP accepted by the board. We were not of that place, and I think both at various points, Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Powery described frustration round about the lack of movement on this topic, and I'm not sure if I suggested it or they suggested, but I certainly agreed to it and said that we should move forward by getting a third party to come in and look at it, and then that way we would have a third party looking at it independently rather than the NHS team saying one thing and the multiplex team saying something else.
Yeah, you kind of bracket Curry and Brown with multiplex there. Were they not working for the board?
Yes, but it didn't feel like that sometimes.
Thank you. And was an independent third party then instructed?
Yes, there was a review completed
Thank you. Now, on page 424, you've listed a number of the issues that you identify. I'm not going to get you to read through these. I just want to take from you, wearing your head of estates hat, an idea of why these kind of things were causing particular problems for the estates team.
Okay. So PTS, loss of power. So the PTS system is a pneumatic tube system which transports samples, in this case, from where the sample is taken from the patient and takes it to the appropriate laboratory, where they then analyse the sample and produce the results. The PTS system kept losing power, and that meant then that what we had was quite often, in fact most times, was specimens then in the pneumatic tube system that we could not get back out of the pneumatic tube system. That took quite a lot of technical intervention to find out where they were and to make corrections to the system to get them to move. In some cases, I believe we may have lost some valuable pathological samples as a consequence of this. It also meant that when the PTS went down, we very often had to clean the PTS system. For the wider hospital, it meant then that we had to revert to manual movement of these things round about the site, for which we did not have adequate soft FM staff and actually had to bring in temporary staff to supplement that. So the PTS loss was a critical system used by the clinical teams in the laboratories for exchange of information and analysis. The foam cannons, sorry.
So I'm not going to ask you to go through each of these and then add your explanation to it. I'm just trying to understand from you, and perhaps I can try and summarize it if I can. You tell me if I'm getting this anywhere near correctly. If an issue with the building or the building systems arose, if it arose in an empty office block, you would just shut the door and wait for the plumber or whoever it is needed to fix it. Can you do that once you've got the hospital up and running?
No, you can't do that. You need to first of all think about continuity of services to maintain patient safety, and very often these are time critical. And also we need to think about general health and safety. So for instance, the ETFE roof leaking meant that there were buckets and water running into the main atrium, to which most of the public that came to the hospital went through. So that then created a slip, trip and fall hazard. So when the hospital is populated with patients, staff and visitors, the consequence of these things need to be completed within an acceptable time frame. On occasions, you can just close the door and continue in the same way that you would do a non-clinical, but that's very dependent on what the patient activity is in the hospital at that given time.
So you set out over the next few pages a number of these issues that were causing stress to the estates team to get done whatever needed to be done. Now, I think the multiplex position will be that they were cooperative and helpful and working to do what needed to be done as quickly as possible. Do you have any view on that?
I think that many of the defects shouldn't have been there when we opened the hospital and populated the hospital with patients. So some of these things should have been addressed before the first patient came into the hospital. I don't think that they were uncooperative, but it very much felt like anything that we wanted them to address, it was a fight to get them to address it, that there were constantly issues that we were being told were not part of defect, they were local operational issues. And I know that there became in the end a reluctance to even escalate things through the defect process, because the general mood in the team, in the estates team, was if you put it on the list, it'll not get done and it'll come back to us anyway, so we may as well try and rectify that problem at the time.
Is that the point you're making on 426 at the foot of the very large paragraph there? Significant pressure on the stretched estates team. Due to patient safety concerns, the estates team tended to address issues on their own.
Yes. Yes, that's correct. Which then further stretched the resource that we did have, because that was not built into any kind of profile of any staff and the amount of defects.
Well, I want to return, at least very briefly, to asset tagging and CAFM. Now, we've been told what asset tagging was, and you deal with that on 427, and you explain at the foot of 427 the kind of problems that created if it wasn't in place. Is that right?
Yes.
So another cause of pressure for the estates team.
Yes.
And does it have an impact on PPM, planned preventative maintenance, as well?
Yes, it does. Asset tagging allows, first of all, knowing where your assets are, what they are, how many of them there are, allows you to develop a PPM schedule. So what needs to be maintained, on what frequency, and at what level. It can be varying levels, from checking things are in place to temperature control to anything. The PPMs can be a whole range of different types of tasks at different frequencies. Asset tagging allows you to identify what your assets are and where they are in a concise manner, to attach a planned preventative maintenance profile to them, and then you have a complete asset history, so that you can look back and see when in fact the asset was maintained, what condition it was in, and it gives you a complete record of that asset and the work that's been done to it, who did the work, and also it allows us to issue electronically to staff what piece of equipment we would wish to maintain. So it assists with the CAFM system. So your asset tagging would be used to populate the CAFM system.
Thank you. I just want to ask you then about CAFM. You deal with this at 429, and you're asked, so far as you were aware, and you weren't involved in drawing up the contract, you'd been told that there was a requirement to produce a CAFM system for the hospital. Is that right? Yes,
that's correct.
And then, according to your statement on 429, you're told in 2014, no, Zutec is all you're getting. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Up until that point in time, myself and the estates team had been led to believe that we were going to be handed over a fully populated CAFM system, which then meant for us that also included the asset tagging, the scheduling of the PPMs, and would allow us then to develop a very robust workforce linked to the number of tasks that we were required to undertake into key skills, and be able to skill match staff. We were unclear about what the CAFM system was going to be, and in actual fact, we held off standardising the whole of the board's CAFM system, waiting to see what CAFM system had been selected for the new hospital, with a view that whatever system had been selected for the new hospital could potentially be the standardised CAFM system for across NHS, G and C. However, as time was getting on, Mr. Powry and the eHealth lead approached the project team and asked when they were going to get information about the CAFM system to allow further work to be completed on it, to talk about the rollout of it, and to get things in place for the hospital opening. Mr. Loudon subsequently came back and said that a decision had been made earlier on in the project that the CAFM system was now not going to be fully populated and handed over, and that Zootech would be the only document repository that we were going to get. That took us by complete surprise in 2014 and did not leave us enough time to basically do what we needed to do.
So we can understand what kind of thing we're talking about. I wonder if I could ask you to look at a document, please, which is bundle 17, page 821, in fact, page 830. This is something that we've been calling the M&E clarification log for reasons to do with an entirely different topic, which I'm not asking you about the reduction in the air changes. And it seems to contain a number of queries and then notes of what's happened about these queries. And you see there's a reference on that page to PPM. You see that on the left-hand side? And it says, BE to provide a full PPM manual and system computer-based software package for all the buildings and for all buildings and building services elements of the project. This system will incorporate as-fitted drawings and specifications, full plan maintenance program of works that the FM and estates managers can review to plan and establish their annual maintenance schedules and annual budgets. BE were responsible for the purchase and installation of the full PPM system. And if we just scroll on to 831, we see the very end of that, including PC workstations, barcode readers, and tablets. So I'm understanding the position, Sim, there seemed to become a bit of an issue between the estates people and Mr. Loudon over this. Is that the kind of thing that you were expecting?
Yes, that's exactly what we were expecting. We were very excited at the prospect of getting a fully populated CAFM system.
Right, and so I can just clarify, what we see in the, under PPM, maybe could we go back to 830, please? What we see against PPM is a system which would achieve certain things. And just looking at the things that would be achieved, is that exactly what you would understand a computer-assisted facilities management package or program, or whatever the appropriate word is, would provide?
Yes.
Thank you.
We can depart from that document now. Thank you very much. And we can return to the witness statement. I think you explained to us a moment or two ago that eventually you were told Zootech was all that was being provided. Who told you that? Is that Mr. Loudon?
Mr. Loudon. Yeah, Mr. Loudon came back and confirmed that to us, that Zootech was all that was going to be provided.
And then there was a debate about whether any issues with Zootech were due to, well, I think we've used the word unfamiliarity by the estate staff. At page 431 of your witness statement, in middle of the bottom paragraph, it says, I was advised by Mr. Loudon this was due to the operational team not being able to use Zootech competently. So it was your team's fault, was it? Is that what he was saying here?
Yes, it was. It was the estate team's fault that they couldn't navigate it, and that everything had been provided by the project team.
Yeah. You think you told his lordship in earlier answer that the argument about whether Zootech was in order continued for some considerable time until eventually there was a meeting at which HFS were present when they said it wasn't populated, and after that things happened. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's what you cover, just for the notes, at page 432, near the top of that page. I just wanted to ask you about the tailpiece that you put in there. You say it felt like the concerns of the estates team and Ian Powery were not believed, and our concerns had been dismissed.
Yeah.
Is that a bit of a theme of what you've put in your witness statement, that as between the estates and project team, not much value is being placed on what the estates people said?
Yes, that was my view, and I know that was the view of the estates team on the site. That when we raised things, they were very often dismissed as being our responsibility because we had failed in some way, or were unable to do what was required of us. That was a consistent theme.
And just to complete that, 433, which is after the discussion about Zootech and so on, we use the word complete disregard on this subject causing stress. Is that, are you exaggerating there?
No, I felt we were disregarded, and it didn't matter what we said or how we presented the information, it was never going to be listened to.
I think we've heard evidence about this at previous hearings, but could you just explain why Zootech is not a computer-assisted facilities management system? What is it that Zootech does not do that you would expect a CAFM to do?
So Zootech is essentially a document repository software system. A CAFM system contains more in it, in that it gives you the ability to program tasks at a frequency which can then, in normal cases and in most CAFM systems, be used to electronically notify staff of what tasks need completing, where they are, and in some cases what the risks associated with that are. So it's a much more comprehensive document. It allows you to match your PPM schedules to your assets rather than being in two separate documents, so that you can then maintain a file of the asset history.
Thank you.
And am I right in thinking that one of the ways these things work is that you have handheld devices and they can read codes on pieces of kit, and they verify what the code is and what's happening, the kit is and what's happening with it? Is that right?
Yes, you can set them up like that, yes.
Okay, let's ask you about a couple of other things. Was there an issue about HEPA filters not being in place in some rooms where they were needed at the point when patients were due to arrive? Is this what you're touching on at the foot of 433? Is that correct?
Yes, what I'm saying in that is, at the point of handover, i.e. in January, I don't know if the HEPA filters were in place at that point in time. However, what I did know was that the weekend before we were due to transfer patients to the hospital, it was raised at a meeting in the hospital to discuss patient transfer that there were no HEPA filters fitted in the hospital. The chief operating officer at that time, who was the lead senior responsible officer on that weekend, highlighted that the hospital couldn't open if there were no HEPA filters in place. That resulted in Mr. Loudon and Multiplex arranging for HEPA filters to be delivered to the hospital and fitted, and confirming that they had been fitted and that appropriate testing had been carried out for their use in the hospital, and therefore the hospital could open.
Were you able to find out how it had come to be that apparently the hospital had been accepted without a piece of equipment that could have prevented it opening?
No, I never found out why that was the case, and there was no discussion about that.
Given the possible significance, and we know from what you say that it was then remedied, did that raise any wider concerns in your mind as to what state the hospital was in?
Yes, for me, it did raise concerns. It was probably the thing that I was most concerned about when I took over the interim role in 2018. When the chief executive asked me what I was most concerned about, one of the things that I said was the thing that concerned me most was roundabout ventilation at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the sick kids, because I felt that we hadn't directly answered the whistleblowers' queries round about air change rates, etc. And I felt that we needed to have a position, a review of the ventilation, and a position from a third party independent on what the ventilation conditions were in the hospital and if they were compliant with the SHTM. And one of my main concerns that led me to that thinking was that the hospital that weekend, that did not seem to be an understanding that HEPA filters should be in place before any patient comes, and indeed should have been in place while the validation and commissioning was ongoing.
We'll perhaps return to the detail of that shortly. I just want to pick up another comment you've made a few pages further on, 4.3, please. In the foot of that page, when you're talking about defects and getting things fixed, you say there's little understanding or appreciation of the consequences of this by Multiplex or the project team on the site, or the ability of the estates team to manage the building. Now, leaving Multiplex aside for the moment, I mean, the project team was made up of GGC people and advisors, was it not? I'm just a little puzzled at the suggestion that people from the board did not seem to understand what other people from the board were telling them about these issues. Is that your perception?
That's my perception. I would suggest, with hindsight, that we were operating in two separate silos. There was the project team and there was the operational estates team, and there was not close enough working between the two, particularly in the defect period. But the project team was disbanded quite quickly after building handover. I think during during 2015, the project team staff went back to their substantive posts, and Mr. Loudon and I think Mr. Moyer were leading on the defect rectification. So the project team itself was disbanded fairly quickly and after patient migration, which I do think made an impact. But I think that in hindsight, we should have been working in a much closer manner, talking about the defects and the impact, but we were not.
Can I take you back to water, please? And we'll find we've covered a fair amount of this ground already. 4.4.5. Now, you asked various questions about the guidance that applies and the structures that were in place, and some of these you've already dealt with. You say at the foot of that page, the duty holder was the chief executive. So that's the sort of ultimate person with responsibility, is that right?
Yes.
So that would be Mr. Calderwood, who was ultimately responsible for water.
That's correct.
Then you were the designated person, so you discovered, and then you explained your attempt to read into the topic a little earlier in your evidence. I just wanted to pick up something that arose, it would appear, from your reading on page 446. You explain in the middle of that page that you've been advised that this was a management position to coordinate the output from technical experts, and then you say you became aware of the need to appoint authorised persons. And then I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly what you're saying. You're saying the advice from all the technical leads at this time was SHTMs were best practice guides, which we should try to achieve, but were not mandatory. Each sector responsible person placed little importance on the appointment of authorised persons at that time, described as best practice, not mandatory or statutory, and the initial focus should be on processes and procedures. Can you help us understand what you're being told there?
So all of the general managers that were appointed into sector positions, and then subsequently myself, when I became the associate director, came from a soft FM background. The estates, senior estates management team, i.e. the estates maintenance managers, did not think that it was the appropriate structure that was in place because they felt that estates would not receive the attention that it required, and that only an estates person should be the general manager for estates. I felt that they were very protective of the estates service and their role in the estates, you know, in the day-to-day management of estates. When I was asking questions, I felt that the view was that I was not in a position to know or understand these things, and that the sector estates maintenance managers were the people who had the technical expertise, and therefore they should be left to manage that, and that I should accept what was being said to me by them, being the technical experts. And there is a degree of truth in that. I am not a technical expert, and my role was to manage the technical experts. What I would say is that we only started looking at statutory compliance in relation to SHTMs and statutory that I remember in the board. Now, bearing in mind, I have not been involved with estates for the whole of my career. I've only been involved since around about 2010. When the National Statutory Compliance and Risk tool was shared with us, there was a desire on the part of the then director to use this to identify if there were any gaps in services. The estates managers responded to that by populating that with yes and no answers and not providing the evidence that would demonstrate compliance. There was not the focus, I didn't feel, on SHTMs, and I became more acutely aware of that when I had the realisation that I was a designated person, and that the designated person role was wider than that. It also made me consider where the general managers for each sector fitted into that scheme of delegation. And that's when the compliance team, as I've said before, was pulled together. So I think my view is that it was not until around about the time of the building of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and then the opening of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital that we put enough focus, or started to put focus on, to compliance with the SHTMs and develop an understanding of what the role of the SHTMs was.
Thank you.
Could you help me maybe on 2 points? Now, you've previously mentioned this in your evidence, and I probably should know the answer, but I don't. You refer to the National Compliance Tool.
Statutory compliance.
Statutory Compliance Tool. Now, tell me about that. I mean,
Okay.
clearly this is first of all, this is a document. I mean, you refer to it as a tool, but it presumably is a document, and it is issued by Scottish Government.
No, it's not issued by Scottish Government. So it's at that time, initially it was an Excel spreadsheet. It was developed by one of the boards. I can't remember quite who the board was, as an aid. It's not a if you comply with this, everything will be fine. It's an aid to identifying where you may have gaps in your statutory compliance. So it asks a number of questions which are based on the legal situation and is based on SHTM compliance. And it's an Excel spreadsheet. It was shared among the directors of estates and facilities as part of the national group where networking and sharing of documentation frequently happens. And it was adopted by our then Director of Estates and Facilities, who thought that it would be very useful. It has been a very useful document and it's still in use today, but it's not a reporting tool to Scottish Government and it is not issued by the Scottish Government. It is something that has been developed within the technical groups in facilities that meet nationally to support each other in delivering services.
Now, the inquiry has acquired a large number of documents, but in the event that it has not acquired this particular document, where should we go to look for it?
NHS Assure can provide you with the current version, and I'm sure there will be archive copies.
Right.
I believe there's a reference in the evidence bundle to the statutory compliance. It was a paper that was added to the bundle in the last kind of 24 hours.
Right. Okay. Maybe my colleagues in the inquiry are ahead of me. I have not read that, but will do so. Now, the other question I had is at page 446 of your witness statement, you refer to the advice from all the technical leads in GGC at this time was that SHTMs were best practice guides, which we should try to achieve, but these were not mandatory. Could you give me any names of people who gave you that advice?
Alan Gallagher, Ian Powery, and it was discussed in some of our SMT meetings where others were in attendance.
Thank you.
Perhaps we could move on to touch at least briefly on another topic, which is pre-occupation L8 water assessments, which the inquiry has had quite a lot about for a variety of reasons. Are you familiar with what, at least generally, what that is? A pre-occupation L8 assessment of the water?
Yes, I am.
Now, you're asked about it on page 447, and you say, well, this should have been done, and you're asked who was responsible for it, and you say project team as part of commissioning and sign off of the water system prior to handover of the building. Is that your position?
Yes.
That's what you think the answer is?
That's what I think the answer is.
And it would appear that one wasn't done before handover. And you're asked, can you help us understand why not? And then you say at the foot of that page, you can't. And then I think you suggest that perhaps, no doubt with the benefit of hindsight, you in your then capacity should have ensured it was in place. Is that your position?
Yes. On knowing what I know today as on the role of the designated person water, I should have ensured that that was in place and that I had seen that and that the actions were closed out. However, because it was a pre-occupation risk assessment, I assumed wrongly that any pre-occupation risk assessments in relation to any topic actually were completed as part of the handover process and the sign-off of the building.
Thank you. And another question that arises naturally from that, 449, please. We're talking there about the fact, as we've heard from others, water was in the hospital systems, before the hospital opened, and you had a concern about the fact that with so many water outlets, you needed to make sure water wasn't stagnating. Then you say about halfway down page 449, at the end of an answer, you say it was assumed the water system was clean at handover, and you then ask, well, should you have assumed the water was clean at handover without an L8 report? And I think, again, you're applying a degree of self-criticism there with saying, well, actually, no, I probably shouldn't have assumed that. Is that correct?
That's correct. I assumed that the system was clean because of the feedback that was given verbally on the sampling regime. That we had checked for TVCs, E. coli, Pseudomonas and Legionella, which I knew were part of the L8, well, not the Pseudomonas, but the L8 ACOP guidance. And I placed great value on the fact that I was being told that the system had been checked, that they had found some evidence of contamination, that it had been disinfected twice, and that the resampling process had came back clear, and therefore the water system was acceptable for use. I'm being self-critical in that the L8 pre-occupation risk assessment should have been completed at the same time, and I wrongly assumed without checking that that would be the case and that everything that required to be done was done. I now understand that without the pre-occupation risk assessment, you can't sign the water system off as being compliant.
But we'll come later to talk about the actual report that was done, which emerged at a later stage. I just wanted to make sure we have, before we leave this, page 450, please, where you say, third paragraph, I didn't assess compliance at handover. I was advised throughout the building process and commissioning process verbally that the water system was compliant with all guidance. Then you ask, well, who told you that? And then what you do in response to that question is you recalled a conversation with Mr. Seaborn, Mr. Loudon's predecessor, when you asked, was there anything you needed to do? And he said something interesting about what the best system that could be. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I remember asking that time, round about the time I discovered there was a designated person for water. I thought, I've got responsibilities with water that I don't really know what they are. So I decided that I would ask Alan Seaborn, did I, since now we were working on the board water safety and I had kind of discovered this, did I need to do anything in relation to the project? In relation to the water system, and Mr. Seaborn came back and said, don't worry about that. We have the best designers working on it and it will be absolutely fine. You'll get the best water system that you could. I subsequently recall a brief conversation with David Loudon about the water system, and was similarly advised that the best designers had been working on it and it would be one of the best systems in Europe. There was a great deal of pride being taken in the building of the hospital and the work of the design, etc. at that time, and everyone thought that what they were doing and producing would provide the right results.
Thank you. Just bear with me a moment. Well, let me just jump ahead a little bit. I'll come back later because the report that was ultimately done was done by a firm called DMA Canyon, and I think you're aware of that name. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, there was a report done eventually that there seems to be a question as to, first of all, who knew that it was being instructed. So not who got the report, but who knew it was being instructed. And I think you're aware of a suggestion from Mr. Powie that you were perhaps aware that he'd instructed it. Now, you deal with this on page 463 of your witness statement. And you say you don't remember any conversation about that. And then you say you didn't think it was your responsibility because it was the role of the project team, which is the point you've made before. Were you aware that DMA Canyon were being instructed? Can you help us at all?
Being instructed to complete the risk assessment.
Yes.
I don't remember the conversation with Ian Powery. However, if Ian Powery had said to me, for instance, when we were meeting about other matters, I've spoke to the project team and we need to get the pre-occupancy risk assessment. Are you okay if I just instruct that? I would absolutely, on his advice, have said, yeah, we should do that. But I don't actually recall the conversation itself.
Thank you. When, I mean, you're asked here, when were you first aware of it?
Well, it's maybe you're taking this forward. It just occurs to me there's a distinction between being aware of an instruction and giving an instruction.
Yeah. I think your position is you didn't instruct an L8 report, although you now suggest perhaps you should have made sure it was done. Were you aware that that DMA Canyon had been instructed? And that's the answer you've just given us at the moment, that you've no recollection of that. And in terms of the report coming in, you're asked, when did you become aware of it? Now, your answer here is about May of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
How sure are you of that date?
I'm not absolutely sure of that date, but the first recollection I have of seeing it is when it was given to me by the chief executive of the health board. That's the first time I am aware of me seeing the report. And it was round about that time of year because I remember that it was very like the weather just now.
The reason I'm asking is that one witness told the inquiry that various people may have known about this in 2017. Are you aware of you being aware of the report in 2017?
No.
And so, can you help us at all whether anyone you discussed it with was aware of it earlier than the around May of 2018 date?
The project team were aware that a risk assessment was being done because I found in the evidence pack that was sent out for today a copy of an email dated the 15th of April 2015 from Ian Powery to members of the project team, updating them on some of the information that had already started to come through. But before it being given to me by the chief executive, no, I hadn't seen the document, and when it was given to me, I was completely shocked because by that time we had started running a water technical group. We were into the water incident, and this had not been highlighted to me, that there had been a risk assessment. We were doing a look back and trying to find all the documentation we could about the commissioning and the water system itself. But I don't know in 2017.
And could it have been earlier in 18, like March, for instance? When,
Yes, it could. Yes, it could have. It could have been. It could have been March, April.
But your recollection is May.
It's around about that time of year.
Mm. But if I've understood your answer, whether it's in March, May, another time, you had your attention drawn to it by the chief executive.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
I suppose that the question that flows from this is along these lines. You now think, well, with benefit of hindsight, I should have made sure that the preoccupation assessment was done. Should there have been other assessments done subsequent to the 2015 one, for instance, in 16 or 17, that you should have been aware of?
Yes, there should have been there should have been a risk assessment done on an annual basis, or you can agree to do it biannually with your risk assessor. But normally you would carry these out on an annual basis. At that time, I didn't know that you did them on an annual basis. However, I did ask Alan Gallagher when the water incident happened. When I asked him about this report in particular, were there any subsequent to be told that there was a risk assessment completed in 2017 too? This was in 2018, but it had not been received at this point. And when I asked, why is it not been received if it was started in 2017, he didn't have an answer for that either.
And sorry, the reason you didn't, wearing your hat, do anything about annual assessments was initially that you weren't aware that they were to be done annually. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. And just so we're following where this is covered in your witness statement, 464 in paragraph 101, you're dealing with the date of the 2017 report not being received until 2018 for reasons that you didn't know. You've touched in your witness statement on the consequences of not dealing with reports of this kind, which we've actually had quite a lot of evidence about. I mean, on page 465, you explain how you became aware of it. If we just leave the date, precise date aside for the moment, do you remember the circumstances very well? Near the 104 on page 465, you say the report was given to you by the chief executive. Do you remember
That's
that
correct.
happening?
Yes, I do.
And when you say it was given to you, I mean, were you routinely meeting Miss Grant, or was this a special meeting?
No, it wasn't a special meeting. I think on that day she just might have asked to see me. And that happened about a range of topics. If there was anything that needed to be discussed, there would be a request made. Could I come up and see Mrs. Grant between such and such a time and such a time? When I went to see her, she physically handed me a paper copy of the document. That's how I first received the document that I can recollect.
And did she tell you where it had come from?
Yes, she advised me that she had been provided with the report from Mr. Tom Steele, who was the director of HFS, and that it had been sent to HFS as part of the archived documents that Mr. Powery had sent on to HFS as part of the water incident water technical group work. It took me completely by surprise because we had been talking about the water system. Nobody had raised this at all. When I went back, I left there and went back over to the QE to meet with Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Powery to find out if they had been aware of this. Mr. Gallagher advised me that he had not been aware of this. This was the first that he'd heard about this. When Mr. Powery came back over from the hospital, he advised me that there had indeed been one done in 2015, a risk assessment completed in 2015. And when I asked him if I assumed that I had missed this report in my emails and that in some way I had missed it, you know, and I couldn't understand this. He advised me that he had never sent it on to me, and I asked, well, who did you share it with? Mr. Gallagher? No. I said, did you share it with Mr. Hunter? No. And he advised me that he hadn't shared it with Mr. Loudon. He actually advised me at the time that he couldn't remember what he had done with it at the time, but he was extremely upset at this omission.
Lord, that might be an appropriate point to pause.
Yes, Ms. Kane, we'll take our lunch break, but could I just check on two matters of detail before we rise? Now, at page 450 of your witness statement, you refer to a conversation with Alan Seaborn. Now, and as you say, he was the project director before David Loudon came into post. Can you recollect what Alan Seaborn's position was at the time of that conversation with you?
He was the director of the New South Glasgow Hospital build.
Sorry, he was the director of
the New South Glasgow project.
Yes, but at the time of the conversation, I understood.
No, that's sorry, sir.
Sorry, you tell me.
He was the project director at that time.
Right. Okay. Yes. Right. I'm now with you. My fault. And the other point of detail is that when you were asked by Mr. Connell about the risk assessment instructed in 2017, you were told by Alan Gallagher that a risk assessment had been instructed in 2017, but it was not received until 2018. Now, it's just that I understand when that conversation, when are you having that conversation with Alan Gallagher? Is it after the 2015 risk assessment had been brought to your attention?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And was Alan Gallagher saying to you that as at that date, the 2017 risk assessment had not been received?
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
That's when I said, well, I instructed a 2018 risk assessment to be done, and that the risk assessment needed to be done quickly so that we could identify and address any outstanding issues. I had given that instruction before the 2017 risk assessment was received by the board.
Right. Thank you. Well, we're now nearly 1:10. So if you could be back at your screen by 2:10. Right. We could now have lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please stand.